And and so you will notice that that one person is dominating meetings. And they're dominating meetings usually not because they know more, but because they're the bloviating bullshitter. And that is a disaster. That means the people who do know are being silenced by the people who don't know. And that's not a great way to start making better decisions and to build better products.
Kim, you're very welcome to the ScaleX Insider podcast. I'm really delighted and thrilled to have you on the show today.
I'm thrilled to be with you here from rainy California.
Yeah, look, we're keeping our fingers crossed for the Wi-Fi connection. So let's hope by the next hour it plays ball with us. So, you know, our vision is to inspire, connect, and enable millions of ambitious leaders of small and medium-sized enterprises to scale with purpose. So, Kim, what does scaling with purpose mean to you?
So what it means to me is to grow at the right pace, not to be the victim of your investors, which I've been before, but to figure out what's the right way for you to grow in a way that that maximizes joy and your team's ability to continue to grow, that doesn't burn you all out.
Yeah, maximizing joy. We talk about growing with joy, flow, and ease, which is sadly lacking in many scale-ups. You've had an incredible career. You've touched on it there, given some of the VC investment that you've had in previous companies, but a very varied career, from running a pediatric clinic in Kosovo to starting a diamond cutting factory in Moscow to, of course, working with Silicon Valley icons, including Larry Page, Steve Jobs, Sheryl Sandberg. So, you know, what led you to ultimately coaching CEOs and writing your wonderful book? I have a copy here in front of me, Radical Candor.
So my whole business career was really just a big plan to subsidize my novel writing habit. And when I decided to write Radical Candor, the two things came together. So I had operating roles at 3 failed startups. I had been a leader at 3 failed startups, and then I joined Google. That worked out a lot better, and then I went to Apple. But the thing that has given me the most pleasure, really, and the reason why I did all that is because actually I love to write, and it turns out it's hard to make your living as a writer, and tech is a much easier way to make your living. And so I really wanted, I wanted and the reason why I like to read novels and to write them is because it's the best way that I know of to explore how we can create these environments in which everyone can do the best work of their lives and really love working together. And it turns out you also can explore that by being a manager. And so I was able, when I left having operating roles and sat down to write Radical Candor, which, by the way, I thought I could write in 3 months, and it took me 4 years. It's a slow, arduous process. I was able to really sort of articulate the things that I had thought and tried to put into practice as an operating executive. And the other reason why I wrote the book was because as I became a CEO coach, I found that, you know, people don't scale. Companies scale, but individuals do not scale. And there were only so many people I could coach at one time. And so I really wanted to share the advice with everyone. I wanted to coach everyone, but I couldn't. So it turns out books, ideas scale, companies scale, people do not.
Yeah, look, it's a wonderful book. I can understand, having defaced the book, how it took you 4 years to write it. You know, it's been described as the antidote to toxic cultures, and speaks loudly to our own 10th principle of our ScaleX framework, which is positive growth culture. You have a lovely line which says, radical candor gets measured not at the speaker's mouth, but at the listener's ear. So, Kim, share with the listeners, what is radical candor and why is it important for those business leaders listening today?
Sure. I want to acknowledge, by the way, like if you Google that phrase, radical candor gets measured not at the speaker's mouth, but at the listener's ear, it all gets attributed to me, but I did not write that line. I stole it.
Well, that's very honest of you.
And the worst thing is, I don't even know who I stole it from, so I can't give proper credit. Anyway, so radical candor is about caring personally at the same time that you challenge directly. And when you do both of those things, it's radical candor. It's also useful to think about what radical candor is not. Sometimes we challenge directly, but we forget to show that we care personally. And that I call obnoxious aggression. And in fact, in the first draft of the book, I called that the asshole quadrant because it seemed more direct. But I stopped doing that for an important reason. I found that when I did that, people would use these phrases like another Myers-Briggs personality test. And please don't use the radical candor framework this way. Use these terms like a compass to guide specific conversations with specific people to a better place. Now, very often when we realize we've acted like a jerk, it's not our instinct to go the right way on care personally. Instead, it's our instinct to back off on the challenge directly, to say, oh, it doesn't matter, it's no big deal. But it does matter, and it is a big deal. That's why we just said it. And then you wind up in the worst place of all, manipulative insincerity. So if obnoxious aggression is front stabbing, manipulative insincerity is backstabbing. And the thing is, when we think about what goes wrong at work, and it, if you watch The Office or shows like that, you're going to see a lot of episodes about manipulative insincerity and obnoxious aggression. But the fact of the matter is, the vast majority of us make the vast majority of our mistakes when we remember to show that we care personally, because most people are actually pretty nice people. So we remember to show that we care personally, but we're so worried about not hurting someone's feelings that we fail to tell them something they'd be better off knowing in the long run. And that is ruinous empathy. So that's what radical candor is, but also what it isn't.
Yeah, we'll put a link to the little 2x2 matrix in the show notes. So in the top left-hand corner, we have the ruinous empathy, the top right, radical candor, the bottom right, obnoxious aggression, and then the bottom left, which you mentioned, manipulative insincerity. In terms of challenging directly and caring personally, why do you think leaders and people in general find it so difficult to get this balance right, to be able to challenge in the best interests of the company, in the best interests of the team, in the best interests of the individual, in terms of seeking to get that individual to unlock potential that maybe they haven't yet unlocked because they've feared to really tackle something new or whatever? Why do we struggle with this so much?
It's a really good question, because it does seem pretty obvious, doesn't it? Caring and challenging. What's so radical about that? And so I think there's a bunch of reasons, but one of them is that I think we tend to have this false dichotomy in our minds. We tend to think you either have to be a jerk who gets things done, or really nice but incompetent. In fact, I think the seed of radical candor was sown early in my career when I had started the software company. And I came into the office one day, and about 10 people had emailed me the same article about how people would rather have a boss who is really a jerk and an asshole, but really competent, and one who's really nice, but really incompetent. And I thought, are they sending me this because they think I'm a jerk or because they think I'm incompetent? And surely those are not my two choices. But I think we as human beings, we have a bad habit to optimize on only one thing, and not to realize that we can optimize on two things at the same time. And I think that's a big part of the reason, is our propensity for the false dichotomy.
We seem to get this, or certainly startups would characterize radical candor, I think, more so, and I have no evidence to support this, but you get a sense that in that startup phase, the culture of radical candor exists. Small teams,
it's more common.
People are more intimate with one another, and certainly it would be more common. Why do you think we lose this? And what are the warning signs as we continue to scale up?
Yeah, I think it's very natural to lose it as you grow. So when you're small, if you practice radical candor, you're going to be more successful than if you don't. And as you get more successful, you hire more people, you grow. And then all of a sudden, you don't, most companies are really focused on not wanting to lose the care personally part. But when we don't know each other as well, it's a little bit harder to challenge directly. Like if you think about telling someone they have spinach in their teeth, it's much easier to tell an old friend at lunch they have spinach in their teeth than someone you just met, right? It's very kind of basic. And so now all of a sudden there's all these people you don't know at your own company, because most of us can't remember more than about 150 names. And so there's a tendency to sort of pull your punches. And then the culture drifts towards what I call ruinous empathy, where people are not telling each other the things that they need to tell. They're not saying we're going to kill this project, even though it needs to be killed, because they don't want to hurt the person's feelings. It's ridiculous. We're going to continue to waste resources on this thing that's not working because I don't want to hurt somebody's feelings. So then things begin to fail. And then what has happened is you've given an advantage to people who tend to practice obnoxious aggression, because obnoxious aggression is bad, but it works a little better than ruinous empathy. And this is the moment in a startup's growth phase when the assholes begin to win. And that is the moment when the culture really begins to lose. And then people begin to, so the people who act like jerks wind up getting promoted because they're more successful than the ruinous empathy people, and nobody's practicing radical candor. And then the rest of the organization responds to the obnoxious aggression with manipulative insincerity. And now these people have no idea what's going wrong. And that's really when not only does the culture begin to fail, but the results begin to fail. So you want to make sure that you are not losing as you grow those relationships, but you are also not failing to challenge directly.
Yeah, I'm going to come to that in terms of how we continue to cultivate great relationships so we can challenge directly, but at the same time care personally. Let's say I walked into I started at a scaling business that unfortunately was moving away from a culture of radical candor to one of obnoxious aggression. And no one explained to me what the culture of the company was. What would I be noticing after 4 weeks in that business?
You would be noticing in meetings instead of everybody participating roughly equally, which is, there's so much evidence. There's the Aristotle project at Google. There's there's evidence from Amy Edmondson that when everyone on a team participates roughly equally, the team performs better. That matters. That participation of everyone matters more than having one superstar on the team. Ayn Rand was wrong. Newsflash. And so you will notice that that one person is dominating meetings. And they're dominating meetings usually not because they know more, but because they're the bloviating bullshitter. And that is a disaster. That means the people who do know are being silenced by the people who don't know. And that's not a great way to start making better decisions and to build better products. So that's one thing you'll notice in a culture of obnoxious aggression. Another thing, unfortunately, you might notice is that someone will charge into, this gives me great pain to say, but someone will charge into a conference room and say, in the spirit of radical candor, and then they'll proceed to act like a garden variety jerk. And that is not the spirit of radical candor. It's the spirit of obnoxious aggression. So if you notice that kind of thing happening, please take the second edition of the book and remind folks that you could also call it compassionate candor.
What else would I be aware of in terms of getting a whiff that this isn't a radical candor type culture? It's a culture of obnoxious aggression.
You know, you would notice that people are not spending a lot of time trying to understand one another. So if someone gets upset in a meeting, rather than taking a moment to move up on the care personally dimension, people just say, "Ah, don't be so oversensitive," and and that is, telling someone how to feel is really a waste of breath. Because when we communicate with each other, we communicate on an intellectual plane and on an emotional plane at the same time. And if you ignore all the emotional signals that are happening, you're just not going to communicate very well. So communication is ceasing. So what'll happen is you'll have a meeting, the bloviating BSer will dominate the meeting, a decision will get made, and then there'll be a meeting after the meeting. And people will try to undo all the damage that was done in the meeting. So it's really inefficient and political, because the response to obnoxious aggression is usually, politics, people trying to sort of get around it without confronting it. And I would say, like, in this period in history in particular, it's really clear to me how important it is to confront bullying behavior and to confront it early before it does too much damage. Because the problem with bullying behavior is that it actually confers a benefit on the bully. It works for the bully and it doesn't work for everyone else. So it does more harm than good. But all too often we reward the bullies instead of creating consequences for bullying and teaching people a better way to be. So I think that's very often what you'll see is bias, prejudice, and bullying, especially bullying, masquerading as feedback. And those things are not feedback.
So in your view, does any other culture other than one that is exemplifying radical candor scale?
Well, they can scale for a while. There certainly have been examples of cultures that are obnoxiously aggressive that have been successful for a while. I'm not going to pretend like it doesn't work, but it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable. I think, totalitarianism and authoritarian regimes, they work for a while. They do enormous damage while they exist, but they do work for a while. But it's a little bit like self-organizing criticality. So the idea of self-organizing criticality, if you think about a sand pile and you're dropping one grain of sand on a sand pile, there'll be a lot of little avalanches as the sand pile finds stability and grows. Now, if you wet the sand, and I would claim that obnoxious aggression is kind of like wetting the sand, sometimes it will grow taller faster, but then when there's an avalanche, it's cataclysmic. And much worse for everyone, including the people who are acting like the jerks. So it does not work in the long run. It can work for a few quarters, even a few years, but it doesn't work in the long run.
So given, your vast experience and you've worked with so many wonderful companies throughout the years, who for you exemplifies a culture of radical candor?
So it's really important not to use these terms to judge either companies or individuals, because there are cultures that are more radically candid than not. But even in the companies that I'm about to talk about, there was plenty of obnoxious aggression, manipulative insincerity, and ruinous empathy, because these are very human, natural behaviors. And so I don't want to use those terms to judge too harshly. These are mistakes that every single one of us makes every single day. And so the key is to create cultures that when those things happen, we don't sort of chop people's heads off, but we help move things back in the right direction. An example of radical candor that I saw, a couple of examples that I saw when I was working at Google. In the early days, I think Google was particularly good at it. I haven't worked there in, gosh, more than 10 years now. I can't believe it. So I can't say what it's like now. But in the early days, I would see things like, for example, I got into an argument with Larry Page, one of the founders, about an AdSense policy. And I went in to talk to him with Matt Cutts, who was in charge of spam, of eliminating spam, not growing it, shrinking spam, not growing it. And Matt, I had just started at the company, so I was not radically candid. I was pretty quiet in this meeting. But Matt really went to the mat. He started actually yelling at Larry. And I remember getting this pit in my stomach, like, oh my gosh, this person I just met, who is a new friend who I really like, he's going to get fired. He's yelling at the founder. And then I noticed Larry's face, and he had this big grin on his face, like, bring it on. And I realized that Larry was excited and happy that Matt was challenging him, and that was the kind of culture he wanted to build. And that was not the only time I saw something like that. A few years later, the Google was doing sort of revising the AdWords front end, and 99% of Google's revenue at the time was AdWords. So this was a big deal. It was important to get this right. And Sergey, one of the other founders, wanted to do one thing, and the team wanted to do something different. And the team sort of overrode Sergey, and Sergey was, to his credit, willing to sort of accept that. And then Sergey said, well, what if you just put 10 people and experiment with my idea? And the team wouldn't agree to that either. And Sergey banged his fist on the table and said, if this were a normal company, you'd all be doing it my way. But then he smiled and he accepted graciously the defeat. And that was really remarkable to me. It was really one of those moments where I realized these founders are trying to build a particular culture, and they're willing to walk the talk. It was a culture where they really did encourage people to challenge them. I saw something similar. Maybe this example I'm about to give you is a little more obnoxious aggression, but it also is a way of encouraging radical candor. So at Apple, someone I knew got into an argument with Steve Jobs about a particular decision. And he argued once, he argued twice, he argued a third time, because Apple also had a culture that really, where even Steve Jobs, for all his reputation of being a tyrannical dictator, he really did encourage people to argue with him. And this was how he did it. So eventually this guy sort of deferred to Steve and said, well, it's his company, we'll do it his way. And it emerged that Steve was wrong, and the other guy. And Steve charged into this guy's office and said, why didn't we do it your way? And the guy, threw up his hands. He said, well, we did it because we did it your way. And Steve banged his fist on the table and he said, and it was your job to convince me I was wrong, and you failed.
Brilliant.
So there's different ways. And look, that way is not going to work for everyone. Steve Jobs hired people around him who could take that kind of, who didn't mind being treated that way. That certainly would not work for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots in this, and as you're speaking, I'm thinking of the importance here of communicating a vision, and for everyone around that leadership table to understand that they're in service of the vision, not in service of any one particular leader on their team or one particular department, but they're actually there to be radically candid with one another in the best interests of the vision of the company. And also then the other side of that is, a deep understanding of the values of the company in terms of being able to call Steve Jobs out and to understand whenever I'm in a really good debate here. This might, to the uneducated observer of our values and our culture, this might look like I'm going to lose my job. But actually, I know that after 30 minutes of this debate, we're both going to come out of this room with a better result than respectively we thought we were coming into, and it's a better result for the overall benefit of the company. So in that, Kim, how important is the kind of the clarification of the vision and the understanding of the values to create that environment to allow you to create this, radical candor?
Yeah, vision to me is a dangerous word because while I like the word vision, I also have some skepticism around it, because I think what you want to do, what you really want to do, is you want to focus on getting to the best answer.
Yeah.
And in a particular moment. And yes, there's like at Google, it was, we're going to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. And that was really important part of the mission and the vision of the company. But at Apple, for example, they pretty explicitly did not have a mission statement. They did not, but there was a vision. It's just that it was shared in more of I always forget the difference between inductive and deductive, but it was shared in the little bitty details, not in this grandiose kind of statement. So it was shared in, things like Steve Jobs saying the computer is a bicycle for the mind, and talking about human beings being tool builders, and it's our tools. A person can run not that fast when compared to animals, but if you put a person on a bicycle, they're pretty fast, and you put them in a fighter jet and they're faster than any animal. So I think it's really important to remember the way that you choose as an organization to communicate how you do things. And for my money, I think it's you. I'm a writer, so like I like writing the mission statement and the visions, but it's not necessary. And even if you do write it down, it's more important that you live it out in the little day, every sort of moment to moment experiences that people have. In fact, for me, the origin story of Radical Candor came not in this kind of eureka moment of care and challenge, but it came when I was walking my dog. It came in a 2-minute interaction I had with a stranger. So I had this puppy, and I loved the puppy, and I loved her so much I had never said a cross word. And so she's totally out of control. And she jumped in front of a cab. I pulled her out of the way in the nick of time, and I was standing on the street corner with my heart in my throat. And this man, a perfect stranger, looked at me and he said, "I can tell you really love that dog." That's all he has to do to move up on the care personally dimension of Radical Candor. Yeah. But he says to me, "You're going to kill that dog if you don't teach her to sit." And then he points at the ground, this kind of harsh gesture, and he says, "Sit." Dog sat. I had no idea she even knew what that meant. And I looked up at him in amazement, and he said, "It's not mean, it's clear." And so for me, that was challenging directly and caring personally at the same time. And I couldn't have articulated it in the abstract. It's like you want to live out these ideals in these little interactions day to day to day. It was like Larry grinning at Matt when Matt was challenging him. He was saying, "Bring it on. This is the kind of culture I want." Sergey being willing to, he was frustrated and he was allowed to express his human frustration, but being willing to defer to the team and actually kind of celebrating that.
Yeah, and I love the story in the book about the puppy. It really resonates. I took parentage of a young German Shepherd puppy recently, and I have exactly that same experience in terms of it lunging out of traffic and then Googling on YouTube the importance of, at that moment, really disciplining strongly, because ultimately, you could have a dead puppy in your hands. And when you take that into the culture, I mean, that's happening all the time. There's people lunging out, but you don't have often the culture doesn't allow or permit this stranger or another team member to come over and challenge. We don't have this language of care personally and challenging directly. So getting super practical, Kim, how do leaders begin, and especially leaders of small and medium-sized enterprise, where maybe in the larger corporates, this language is more common, but for the business leaders of small and medium-sized enterprise, where these leaders are incredibly busy. I'm not suggesting that those in the larger companies aren't. They're incredibly busy. They're dealing with lots of operational issues right across the business, while at the same time aiming to scale, maybe not getting the sleep that they should. So their tendency is to be a little bit more vulnerable. So you might tend to stray on the obnoxious aggression because you're tired, or how do we get How do we advise these listeners who are scaling businesses, who want to bring in this culture at a really super practical level? What are a number of things they can begin doing?
Yeah, so you touched on a lot of really important things there. One is the most important thing you as a leader can do is to stay centered so that you don't wind up in obnoxious aggression. And so I recommend, like, sit down and write down what is your recipe? What are the things that you need to do on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual basis in order to stay centered? For me, I need 8 hours of sleep, sometimes 9. I need to exercise at least an hour every day, and I need to have a conversation with someone I love. Those are the things I need to do. If I skip one thing one day, it's okay, but those are the things I need to do on a daily basis. And when I'm really stressed, I might need to exercise twice in a day, not once. And yet it's my instinct to exercise 0 times when I'm stressed. So it's really important to stick to that daily pattern. Weekly, I need to read a novel once a week, and I need to take a 2-week vacation once a year, at least. I mean, I need more than 2 weeks, but I need one long chunk of time to really disconnect. And if I can do those things, then no matter how sort of wild the environment around me is, I can more or less stay centered. And if I don't do those things, even if I'm in a pretty calm situation, I'm apt to respond badly to things. So stay centered, figure out what your recipe is, and ask your team. One of the best exercises I did with a team where people were really feeling burnt out, which I think is true on a lot of teams at this particular moment in time, is they all sat down and wrote their happiness, or what were the things they wanted to do. And then they read it to each other, and then they held each other accountable. For example, one time in my career, there was a guy I worked with whose child was having a really serious health issue. And he said, what I need to do in order to make it through this period is to take a walk in daylight hours with my spouse. And we all made sure that he was able to do that every single day. That meant maybe we had to start a meeting later, we had to end meetings earlier, but we made sure he got home in time. And that helped him, but it also helped all of us, because we, sort of, when you feel empathy for someone, but you feel helpless to help them, it's really hard. So do those kinds of things with your team. So that's number one. Care about yourself. Put your own oxygen mask on first, but make sure that your team is able to put their own oxygen mask on first. Number two, you want to solicit feedback. Don't dish it out before you prove you can take it. Your opportunity as a leader is to respond well to feedback when you get it. So 4 things to remember when soliciting feedback. 1, come up with a go-to question that you're going to ask people in the moment. One of the questions that I like to ask is, what could I do or stop doing that would make it easier to work with me? But do not write down my question, because if you sound like Kim Scott, people will not believe that you really want. You got to write down your question. A couple of things to think about in your question is, make sure you ask it in a way that can't be answered with a yes or a no. So in the book, you'll notice I wrote, is there anything I could do? And I got some, if you write a book about feedback, you're going to get a lot of it. And a reader wrote into me and said, it would be much better to say, what could I do? And I'm like, you're right. I wish I had gotten that feedback before the book came out. So make sure that the question can't be answered with a yes or a no. Make sure it sounds like you, but you also need to make sure it works for the other person. Being an authentic leader does not mean ignoring the impact you're having on others. So for example, when I started Radical Candor with Jason Rosoff, the company, Jason told me that my go-to question stressed him out. It was too open-ended. I needed to ask him something more specific. And so I needed to change it for him. I couldn't just say, well, that's the way I asked the question, You gotta adjust for others. So come up with your question. And I would encourage everybody listening to write down your question, and then to write down whom you're going to ask it of and when you're going to ask it. If you do those 3 things, our time today will be really well spent. Now, the bad news about your go-to question is that no matter how good it is, the other person is still going to feel uncomfortable. So the second step to soliciting feedback is you have to embrace the Sorry, you have to embrace the discomfort. The only way out is through. And simple tactic here, we're getting super tactical here.
Yeah.
Close your mouth and count to 6 in your head. I made it all the way to 6 there. That's the first time I've ever done that. Usually people jump in and say something. You, congratulations, are the only person who has ever been able to make it all the way to 6 seconds. Almost no one can endure 6 seconds of silence. So if you can manage to remain silent for 6 seconds, usually the other person will jump in and say something. And it may not be the most profound thing, but they've said something. So now success. However, your next step is to make sure that you're listening with the intent to understand, not to reply. Because this is normal for you to feel defensive. Even though you just solicited feedback, when you get it, you're likely to feel defensive. And that's okay. It doesn't mean you're a lesser mortal. It doesn't mean you're shut down to feedback. It just means you're human. And that's okay. Being human is part of radical candor. So what you want to do is you want to either repeat back what you think you heard, or you want to ask some follow-on questions to what you think you heard. And then last but not least, you got to reward the candor. If you agree with the feedback, it's pretty straightforward. You fix the problem that was raised, and then you ask, did I overcorrect? Did I undercorrect? However, if you disagree with the feedback, it's a little trickier. So here's what to do if you disagree. Look for that. There's something that the person said that you can agree with. So look for that 5 or 10% of whatever the person said that you can agree with, and give voice to that, just to show that you were listening and that you're not instinctively shut down the feedback. And then say, as for the rest of it, I want to think about it, and then I want to get back to you. And then you must get back to them. Don't just brush it off. Don't say, thank you for the feedback. That is experienced as a brush off. And don't say, let me get back to you, and then not get back. You've got to get back to them and have a disagreement. Sometimes an open, respectful disagreement is a wonderful reward for the feedback, because then you've given the other person, you've shown the other person that you were listening. It's an act of caring to disagree with them. Brushing them off just means I don't really care about what you say. And you can't argue endlessly. You want to listen, challenge, commit, but you want to make your listening tangible. You want to make sure that the other person feels heard. And if you change your mind, if in the course of this disagreement you realize that the other person is right and that you were wrong, be theatrical about that. I used to have a "I was wrong, you were right" statue that I would put on people's desks. So that proves to people that they're not wasting their breath when they're arguing with you, that sometimes you will change your mind. And then, at some point, as I said, you got to listen, challenge, commit. You can't argue endlessly, but a respectful argument is often the best way to build a good relationship at work. I think we go ahead.
No, I really love that, and I was going to suggest where our listeners don't have the statue, should we, in front of others, openly praise when you have been respectfully challenged and call it out?
Yes, absolutely. That brings, in fact, there's an order of operations to radical candor. It starts with soliciting it, but the next step is giving praise. And giving praise for good feedback is one of the most impactful kinds of praise that you can give. But you want to praise publicly, not because you're sort of stroking people's egos, but because that shows what good looks like. Your job as a leader is to paint a picture of what's possible. And praise is part of painting a picture of what's possible. It's part of explaining your vision. Like, this is how we work together. This is the kind of work. It shows what good looks like. So praise is really a crucial part of radical candor. So we've talked about several things. You want to have your happiness recipe and understand your team's happiness recipe. You want to solicit feedback, and then you want to give praise. And now it's a good idea to give criticism as well. But if praise and criticism are sort of forehand and backhand of radical candor, And you want to make sure that your praise is humble, is helpful, that it is that you give it right away. Don't hang on to things, and certainly don't save things up for a one-on-one. Don't save things up for a performance review for sure. You want to give it right away, immediately. In the before times, I used to say give it in person, but now I say give it synchronously. And consider the value of the telephone instead of a video. We very often, even in person, we misunderstand each other's body language, and so very often it's good to just talk, have the words, share, listen to the words, but don't send a text. Whatever you do, don't send a Slack. Slack is a feedback train wreck waiting to happen. Have a synchronous conversation with the person. You want to praise in public, criticize in private, and you don't want to give either praise or criticism about someone's personality. You want to sort of use context, observation, result, next step. Corn. In the meeting, when you said every third word, it made you sound stupid, go visit the speech coach. In the meeting, when you argued both sides of the case, it won you credibility. Do more of that. That's what I mean by not giving praise or criticism about someone's personality.
Yeah, that wonderful, wonderful advice. Just coming back to the mindset of the leader and the inner work, the staying centered. When did the penny drop for you that I really need to, I really need to get to know myself a little bit more, where maybe there's chaos happening around you, you're frustrated, in your head, you're right, everybody else is wrong, why are they not behaving the way I want to behave? And at some point you understand or realize, as a leader who's aiming to develop a culture of radical candor, that actually this starts with me. Maybe I have to change first. Maybe it's not everybody else. Maybe it's me. Did you hold the mirror up to yourself at a point and say, actually, rather than me being obnoxiously aggressive, and that wouldn't have been the language that you would have associated with your behavior at a time, did you at a point hold the mirror up and say, actually, I need to change before I start to expect everyone else to change or to do what I'm telling them to do?
Yeah, I think more often than not, the mirror was held up for me.
Right.
More often than not, the people who held that mirror up were the people who worked for me. So if you're willing to look into the mirror that your team is holding up for you, there's nothing you can do that's more important as a leader. I would say the penny has been dropping on my head almost every day of my career. Sometimes you have to learn the same thing in 10 different ways before you really get it, and then you learn it 10 more ways, and but there was one moment well, there are a bunch of moments. I'll tell you a couple of them. I remember early in my career, I was at a startup, and the CEO of that startup he was obnoxiously aggressive. He was so mean, basically. I remember I shrunk. He was so belittling that I literally physically shrunk half an inch. And I always promised that if I were in charge, none of those things would happen. Everything would be so much better. And I actually quit that company and started one of my own. And there was a moment when I realized that a lot of the things that had been happening at that startup where I had condemned that CEO were happening at my startup where I was CEO. And I had this moment where I realized that no matter how good my intentions, just because I was in charge didn't mean that human nature was different. Just because I had hired good people didn't mean that they would never do bad things, and that it was really my job as a leader to create the systems, the management structures, to be very proactive in challenging bad behavior. And and I realized when I got to Google that they were doing a lot of those things. And one of the things that Google was doing that was really important was to systematically strip power away from managers. And so no manager at Google, even the founders, even the CEO, no manager had unilateral hiring rights, decision rights. They couldn't unilaterally fire someone. They couldn't unilaterally promote someone. They couldn't unilaterally pay bonuses out. And they couldn't even unilaterally pay spot bonuses. Only other peers could pay the spot bonuses. And this was really important. And Google did that not because they wanted to disempower managers, but because they wanted to push managers to find their authority by building respectful relationships with each of their direct reports, not by becoming these little mini dictators. And it was Shona Brown, who led business operations at Google, who really designed a lot of these systems, and who I have talked to many times since then about how important it is to design those systems. So don't assign unilateral decision-making power to any individual in your company, including yourself. Create checks and balances on yourself. Alan Eustace, who's one of the engineering leaders in Silicon Valley, who I most admire, asked me a question recently. He said, I am the chair of the board of a number of startups. How do I make sure that if I'm the problem, there's a check on my power? Who can people go to? Be like Alan Eustace in more ways than one. I mean, you don't have to jump from the stratosphere in a hot air balloon, but in a weather balloon, which is something also that Alan did. But be like him in every other way. He's really one of the great leaders in Silicon Valley because he's so humble and because he thinks about the system. See, I think we're so tempted to think, oh, if I just hire the right people, they'll do the right thing. They will not. People in organizations start behaving badly unless you design. If you don't design your systems for fairness, you're going to get systemic injustice and you're going to kill innovation out of your company. You're not going to scale.
Yeah, there's so much in that. I'm conscious of time. A couple of questions before we move into our close, Kim. I just want to come back to something you've mentioned within your book about the team members and something that I fell foul of often in my CEO career, but was the desire to promote people because I felt they were deserving of a promotion and promoting functional experts into management positions when really very different competencies required, and you just you kill them, you kill their expertise in that position. And you distinguish between rock stars and superstars in the context then of actually being mindful of how you treat both. So I know I've wrapped a lot in there, but can you just share with the listeners the importance of understanding the difference between the rock stars and the superstars, and not making that critical issue of actually promoting functional experts into management positions because they're deserving of a promotion?
Yeah. So I want to draw another distinction as well. So the idea of rock star and superstar is really important. A person who is in rock star mode. Don't hang labels on people because we all are in different modes at different points in our career. But a person who is in rock star mode is someone who is great at their job, but they're not necessarily gunning for the next big promotion. They don't want your job. They don't want your boss's job. They don't want to be Steve Jobs. They just want to do their job, and they'll do a great job if you don't screw it up. So that's what rock star. Think Rock of Gibraltar. And whereas when a person is in superstar mode, they do want that next big job. They're on a very steep growth trajectory. So two people in the same job, one may be in superstar mode, the other may be in rock star mode, and they're both doing equally good work. So it's really important that you give them equal ratings and that you don't give high ratings to people in superstar mode. That's not fair, and not give high ratings to people in rockstar mode. That's not fair to the people in rockstar mode. The financial reward for being in superstar mode is that next promotion. So, but you want to make sure that you're honoring people in rockstar mode and not promoting them if that's not what they want. And there's a bunch of reasons why people might not want a promotion, why they're in rockstar mode. They may not want to do the thing that is required at the next promotion. And that is often the case if the promotion is into a management role. But I want to distinguish between management and not management. In a great company that scales, you can continue to be promoted as an individual contributor. There's a parallel path. One of the most important things I think that Google did is they created an engineering path for managers, engineering managers, and then a parallel track for engineers who were great engineers, but who did not want to manage. And so don't conflate superstar mode and management. Sometimes you may have a junior manager who's a great junior manager who would be a terrible VP. You don't want to punish that person because they don't want to or don't have the interest in being a VP. You want to reward them for being a great manager, right? So I think that's really important. Very often a mistake that one mistake that we make is that we promote people beyond their desire or their competence, the Peter principle, right? And that's mismanagement of people in rockstar mode. But when people are in superstar mode, sometimes if you're a manager who's in rockstar mode yourself, you might be tempted to clip their wings. Don't do that. People who are in superstar mode may zoom right on by you. Maybe they're shooting star mode, but you're lucky to have them in your orbit when you have them. And if you help them achieve what they want to achieve, it's really great for them, and it winds up usually being great for you as well.
Yeah, and that's a whole nother podcast in terms of what those managers must do in order to be selfless in being the star makers and not seeking to be the star by constantly clipping those underneath you, so there's so much in that. The last hour has absolutely flown, Kim. I would love to have you back on. As is a tradition in our show, I always pose the question to our guests. Given the wonderful experience that you've had to date and continue to enjoy, can you leave our listeners with 3 timeless takeaways?
Yes. Number 1, solicit feedback. Don't dish it out before you prove you can take it. Number 2, give praise. Focus on the good stuff. Your job as a leader is to paint a picture of what's possible, and praise is more important than criticism for that. And number 3, give criticism that is kind and clear, that helps people grow.
Yeah, love those. Kim, what's next for you?
I am writing a novel in which I solve all the world's problems.
Brilliant.
I think there's so much pessimism and negativity. And as my children look forward, I have kids who are 13, look forward to the future, that they can sometimes be a little cynical, which partly is age appropriate. But also, I think there's what to be distressed about. And I think it's really positive target identification is something that I have really believed in my whole career. What I mean by positive target identification is if you're skiing through the trees, you want to look at the gap in the trees. You don't want to look at the trees. You want to look at the way you're going to get through this. You don't want to look at all the disasters. I mean, you want to be aware of the disasters. I'm not saying be in denial, be aware of the trees so you don't hit them. But if you focus too much on them, it's actually more likely that you'll hit them. So this is my effort to imagine a world that is truly fair and reasonable.
I wish you every success with that, and sound advice as I depart to go skiing next week. So I'll remember. I love that. Indeed. So for anyone, Kim, who wants to reach you, how best to connect with you or find your work?
Yeah, radicalcandor.com is our website. And you can also, I have a new book, which I'm going to encourage people to check out. It's called Just Work, and the website there is justworktogether.com. So follow, you can sign up for our newsletters. You can, Twitter may blow up, but in the meantime, it's at Kimball Scott. I'm less and less on Twitter, and I'm on LinkedIn more and more.
Brilliant. Well, look, we
also Mastodon and Post, but who has time for all of this?
Indeed, yeah, I get those are new to me as well. So we'll put links to those in the show notes, Kim. Look, it's been an absolute privilege to host you on the show today. Congrats again. I just love your book. For all of the listeners, I encourage you to go and grab a copy of Radical Candor and the other works of Kim. Kim, I wish you all the very, very best with your novel, and I look forward to keeping in touch.
Thank you so much. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you so much, Kim.